Welcome back. If you can believe it, we're about to start our final and fourth and final module. And I hope that everything was interesting in the special events module and that you enjoyed writing a press release, which I think is really interesting. And now we are going to write a grant letter of inquiry. So the writing is getting a little bit heavier, but also the work I think is becoming hopefully really pertinent to what you are doing every day in your agencies as resource development vistas, or if you're not a resource development vista, that you're learning things that you can bring back to your organization. So moving on to module 4, grants. Grants are my favorite part. This is my area of expertise. This is probably the one that I know the most about. I can tell you a couple things about grants, foundations, and government funding. One is that it is very rare that a foundation or a government agency will actually fund your entire project or proposal. So you need to make sure that you have either other funding ideas in place, or that you're going to go to the foundation and talk about the way that you're going to fund those extra pieces. And other things that you have to think about with grants are obviously having really, really careful accounting of the deadlines, of your budget, of exactly what that foundation or that government agency is willing to fund and what they're not willing to fund. If they're not willing to fund staff hours, don't ask for money that is for personnel only. And sometimes you have to think about whether or not a grant is worth applying for at all. So if you only need personnel funding and you find a grant that seems perfect, but they don't fund personnel, it's probably a waste of time to apply. So we're going to think about all of those structural issues, and then we're going to dive right into writing and thinking about how to identify good grant opportunities for your organization, and then how to write something that's really compelling and that's going to get you the grant that you want. So the first kind of grant that you can start thinking about are government grants. They can be really useful for those of us working in organizations that have VISTA projects because they're often focused on organizations with anti-poverty missions. And so you already have an anti-poverty grant if you are a VISTA. You might fit really well with some government funding, but couple of things to think about. One is that they tend to be very, very strict about what you can spend the money on. You have to state exactly how you're going to spend the money, and then you have to actually spend it precisely that way. And also, government grants can be really onerous on small organizations. They have a lot of administrative costs and administrative functions, and usually can't pay for those administrative things, or you never can pay for those administrative functions with that grant. So it can often cost a small organization even more money to have a government grant. But for some of us, they're a really, really good place to start, and you might want to start looking into some of these grants for your organization. So in addition to government funding, we're going to look into foundation funding as well. Foundation grants often start with a letter of inquiry, and that's what we'll start in this module. And then there are other elements to deciding whether or not to write a letter of inquiry or a full proposal for a foundation. And of course, that has to do with what they're looking to fund. There are a lot of foundations who will fund only capital campaign. So even if they love your mission and they fund exactly what you do, it's not helpful if you're not trying to build a new building or buy a bus. So you have to think about what they want to fund and whether or not it's worth your time to write that letter of inquiry or to make that phone call. Some other things to think about are that a lot of foundations are local and they have a certain understanding of the place that you work and where your organization is, and the landscape. And so you want to be very careful and specific about what you do and how what you do is different than what other organizations who have similar missions in your community, because it's very possible that they fund those organizations as well, and they want to see why they should fund you, either in addition to them or maybe even instead of them. So there's a lot of creativity and artistry and thought that goes into foundation funding, just as it does go into government funding as well. It just looks a little bit different, and we will learn how to identify foundation funding that is appropriate for our organizations. So this part of the course will focus on 3 phases of pursuing grants. The first is learning about the grant process and understanding the groundwork that you have to lay beforehand. The second, which is very important, is researching grant opportunities, learning how to find the right grant for your organization. And the final is writing that letter of inquiry. So this is a common first step, as we've stated, in seeking foundation funding, and you want to make sure that your letter of inquiry really gets you in the door so that you can submit that full proposal. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to raise $50,000 in grant funding for Community Kitchen in support of the Summer Community Garden Project. So in this module, we will complete 3 main activities that will raise that $50,000 for the project. The first is making decisions on how to answer questions about grants from the Fund Development Committee, which maybe doesn't have a whole lot of experience around grants and grant writing. The second is researching grant opportunities in the Foundation Center database, which will help you to identify grant opportunities that align with the Community Kitchen mission. And finally, we will write a letter of inquiry. So we'll identify a grant and write a letter of inquiry on behalf of Community Kitchen and the Summer Community Garden Project that aligns with both the expectations of the foundation as well as really shows off what Community Kitchen does. And at the end, we will hopefully have not only raised that $50,000, but we're getting much, much closer to our $200,000 goal. So this is our last video. But if you need to get a hold of me, of course, you can always email me and message me, and I will be available to you. I really look forward to all of the elements of this module, but especially your letters of inquiry. And hopefully I'll be able to give you some feedback that will help you not only in this course, but that can help you as you go out into the world and try to raise money for your own organizations. So thank you so much, and I will be chatting with you over the course of the next few weeks. Take care.